With me today is David Griscom, host of the Left Reckoning podcast and author of the new book, The Myth of Red Texas: Cowboys, Populism, and Class War in the Radical South. Uh, David, tell me about this book. We just had this comes out in sort of a precipitous time. You talk about it in your introduction. It seems like the last decade or so. People are always talking about, Texas is about to turn purple. It's on the brink of some change there, and it feels like the 2024 election came along and just kind of, shoved that argument way back. What was tell me about sort of your inspiration to write this book.
Yeah, I mean, totally. You oftentimes, spend any time in political media, people are always wanting to talk about Texas, supposedly going blue in this or that election. And one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was that much of the strategy that we've seen from the Democratic Party in the past few decades uh, hasn't been up to the task. But there has been this kind of counter narrative that the reason why they'll never win is just because Texas is automatically conservative, when in fact Texas has a very strong kind of pro working class, radical and populist history that I think is really important for Texans to know. And being able to kind of challenge this kind of determinative view of our politics as either being left or right. And understanding that like there's kind of a lot of very rich and important traditions for people to be able to reckon with was a big part of the reason why I wanted to write the book.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify too. I think that the title, it's a good title, but something about it does, Texas hasn't always been red, but it hasn't all, it's not that necessarily the idea is that, that it was great when Democrats were in charge. It seems like often Democrats are in direct confrontation with a lot of the people you're talking about in this book.
No, totally. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book too is for people who are doing kind of working class organizing, labor organizing today. The party that was in power was different back then, but a lot of the kind of ideology and characters and interests were represented in that old Democratic Party that dominated Texas politics for a long time. So, on one hand, there is a kind of continuity throughout Texas politics in terms of the politicians who have held power across both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah. Let me get a little into your background. Are you like native Texan, born and raised?
Yeah, so I'm from Austin. I went away for a little while, moved to DC and New York, and I've been writing about Texas politics and Texas history for a very, very long time. And one of those things that is funny, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book is that a lot of times for people who do kind of like labor politics, labor organizing, when you talk to people in Texas or outside of Texas about it, they'll kind of treat that as if something that has been maybe imported to Texas instead of something that's very homegrown. So that's always been a part of like the research interest for me is kind of looking at that longer tradition in the state.
Sure. I know your co-host Matt Leck, I believe he's in New York. A lot of your colleagues are. What, in a time like this, someone that kind of wears your political leanings on your sleeve. What keeps you here in Texas?
I mean, well, one, I'm a Texan and I just care and believe very deeply in this state. I mean, Texas means the world to me. It always has ever since I was a little kid. I mean, for better or for worse, this is home. I mean, every year for my birthday, I would go to the Alamo. I mean, it's like that kind of like that was very much brought up into that idea, and the idea of ever wanting to leave this state and not come back, is just totally foreign to me. And especially when you see one some of the things that are happening now politically that I find to be encouraging. In addition to this kind of long tradition, I feel even more committed to being in Texas, just knowing that it's a part of a much longer kind of political and historical tradition here.
Sure, sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about the populists, specifically in this book. You talk about the People's Party, the rise of that, how it led into the socialists, and you talk about how populism is maybe a maybe an overused or poorly used term nowadays. Tell me, how do you differ? because a lot of people consider, Trump a populist,
Mhm.
possibly Trump and Bernie. I feel like those are the two big figureheads for that nowadays. How do you compare the modern usage of populist to how it was used in the days that you were writing in the book here?
Yeah, I mean, today when people use the term populist, I think they usually mean it in the sense of somebody who's using a certain kind of rhetorical style. And usually that rhetorical style is defined, one, by a kind of distrust of authority, but also by using a kind of us versus them language. And there's no doubt about it that there are parallels with like the actually historical existing populist movement, both in Texas and across the United States. But when you turn populism into a kind of rhetorical style, you miss out on all of this history. Like, for example, in Texas, yeah, the Populist Party, the People's Party, ends up becoming one of the major parties in the state of Texas. In fact, it overtakes the Republican Party as the second largest party in the state. In particular, in this period of the 1890s, most of politics in Texas were this kind of pitched battle between the Democratic Party, which had ruled the state, after Reconstruction, against the People's Party. And the People's Party is something that's very, very different, I think, from kind of what we might call populism today, in the sense that there was an actually constituted people. And what I mean by that is that when you said, "Oh, we're standing up for the people," you knew who you were talking about. That meant poor cotton farmers, that meant laborers, that meant members of the working class, right? It wasn't some kind of amorphous idea. When people spoke of the people, they understood who they were and also who they weren't. And yeah, that's why that kind of terminology that also incorporates people all the way from Bernie Sanders to Trump, I think really muddies the water, because the populist movement too, um, really was focused on a set of policies. It wasn't just some kind of loose association of rhetoric and just kind of like a blind rage against the system. These were people who actually came out of a very practical version of politics. And without getting into too much of the weeds of like the agricultural system back then, basically working people couldn't get ahead. They started organizing together and saying, "Hey, why is it that the people who work the least get the most, and the people who work the most get the least?" And they started to realize that, hey, there's a rigged system against everyday people in Texas. So if we want to deal with this, here are some solutions that we have. The government didn't respond to it. So they started to organize themselves into political parties and started running for office, right? And again, like that's different from a kind of populism that is just solely focused on a kind of rhetoric. That was something that was, yes, very passionate, very motivating, and very kind of grassroots in the sense that it appealed to everyday people. But it was also something that was like very practical, strategic, and thought out.
Yeah. And you kind of open the book talking about the Cowboys and the formation of they started a union together. And most of them I thought was interesting because you always see this kind of the romantic ideal of the Cowboys, just kind of this lonesome figure out on his own. And it's the Wild West, every man for himself and everything. So it was a little bit interesting to find out in this book that a lot of Cowboys actually stuck together, looked out for each other when they're doing business. Can you go into detail a little bit about what they were like back then?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first stories I tell in the book is about this cowboy strike in the Panhandle in Texas, and the story is interesting because yes, it does kind of buck these narratives about what cowboying was like and how cowboys thought of themselves, and the story basically goes that there was this pushback from this kind of growing land owning class in Texas that was really trying to change the way that cowboying worked in the state. And a lot of cowboys started to realize that their way of life, the idea of being a cowboy, being a working cowboy, was going to disappear. And that they were going to go from being, yes, this kind of romantic, free individual to basically just wage workers. So they start to push back against the system and start to demand certain things for themselves. And this cowboy strike is very interesting because as I kind of lay out in the book, it seems that it was just a massive success, this kind of cowboys union. What ends up happening in the larger historical context is the same thing that happens with unions all across American history and today, which is that they kind of win their demands, and then the company says, okay, but secretly in the next 2 years, we're basically going to fire all of them. That's something that anyone who's maybe organized a union has probably experienced or seen before. So rather than this, and the reason I bring that up is because the way the story is often told in Texas history is like, oh, this is kind of an interesting moment where these cowboys try to do something, but this was so out of touch with their values. And you can read versions of it that's like, oh, they just got drunk in the saloon and they wasted their strike funds. When the opposite happened, they were very, very successful at this. And it was the bosses acting in a typical way that bosses do that ended up kind of ending this strike. So one of the reasons that I wanted to open up the book with this story was to notice, like, yes, it's true, they do lose, but it wasn't because of something inherent in cowboying or like in a kind of conservative individualistic version of cowboy work. And why is it that when we hear all of these kind of memories of the Old West, we don't kind of hold up these figures who are actually trying to fight for at least some versions of the Old West to continue before a more kind of industrialized agricultural system took over the state of Texas?
Sure. Yeah. Um, do you think do you think there's any possibility of Texas kind of returning to this state of very much class identity and supporting workers supporting each other and forming unions and things like that? Do you think that's something we could return to? And if so, I mean, how do you see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I 100% think it's something that we can return to, and that's one of the big parts of the book is trying to give us a language in this state to understand ourselves as part of this tradition, so that we can learn to come from the kind of the failures and the successes, and yeah, let's get a little concrete on it. I mean, I think you can look at just on the political side. Let's start there. The victory of Taylor Ramette, nearby y'all, was a massive victory, I think, for a version of working class politics that's totally different from what we see from the Democratic Party normally. When it came to these kind of culture war issues that are very successful at dividing people, he was able to sidestep them and say, like, I'm here looking out for bread and butter issues for everyday folks. Massively successful in an area that voted for Trump, by significant margins. And you also saw this, to a certain extent with the Tallarico campaign, not as explicitly as with Taylor Ramette. And I would suggest that the Tallarico campaign kind of look at some of the lessons from what worked there. But if you look at the message that you saw from James Tallarico's campaign, is very much focused on the kind of billionaire class versus the rest of us. So what we're seeing here is not the fully formed version of what I would like to see, but we're seeing these kind of whispers that, yeah, there are more and more ways that Texans are starting to think of themselves as members of a class. And look on the Republican side, even the success of Donald Trump, as much as I disagree with him and his politics, a large part of it was talking about things like affordability, and things of that nature. And yes, I've always found that there's a kind of viable avenue there. Problem for the Democratic Party is it hasn't had a lot of representatives or people running for office who are kind of the working class. But larger than all of that, because I don't think that you can take this lesson correctly from the populists and some of these other movements I'm talking about, if you don't understand that what really mattered and what really allowed these movements to grow and be successful in the ways that they were successful was that everyday working class people were organizing themselves, not just into unions, but into just different kind of political, social, and economic organizations. And I think that that's where we have a lot of work to be done. But we are seeing kind of exciting movements like this. The labor movement in Texas has been getting, has continued to kind of look at new ways and new groups of people to organize. And we are seeing some kind of exciting things on that front as well. So I do think that it's possible. I don't think it's just going to happen by any accident of history. It's something that you have to actively pursue.
Sure. And I did want to talk about this primary that just happened.
Hmm.
We saw Tallarico is the Democratic candidate for Senate. Um, and I feel like for a lot of people, this was Jasmine Crockett's race to lose. I think I remember even before she had announced her candidacy, I think I'd seen polls where she was the front runner. I mean, what do you think it says that Tallarico kind of snuck up and usurped her for this position?
Yeah, I mean, as I was kind of noting before, I think that one of the things that Tallarico had that he was very successful with was using this kind of message around billionaires and fairness. I mean, the fact that if you were to ask somebody what Tallarico stood for, I mean, you certainly hear about kind of like reclaiming Christianity from the right, but you would also hear something about fairness, billionaires, and money in politics. Those are all winning issues in the state of Texas. Also, on a more technical level, It was just a campaign that I think was run very, very well. The more that we see from it, like the amount of coordination and ability for them to kind of like allow different groups across the state to start organizing for that campaign, I think led to some of the major victories in the parts of the state that they did really well in. And the last point I would note, and I wrote about this for Jacobin magazine, was that Tallarico did extremely well in parts of the state where Bernie Sanders won in the presidential primary. He lost the primary in Texas, but in the areas where Bernie Sanders won, Tallarico did tremendously well. So there's a part of Tallarico's campaign that I also think was like building up on this idea of a campaign that was really about mobilizing working class people on issues that matter to them, and that kind of coalition that I think was maybe promised and hoped for around Bernie Sanders, we saw to really materialize for him. And anybody who watched that 2024 election will remember that one of the big crises for the Democratic Party has been that they've been losing Hispanic voters in droves. And seeing where Tallarico did really, really well, I think shows a kind of viability to that campaign strategy to kind of flip the script a little bit.
Sure. Um, and one thing I've heard uh, a lot recently is this Texas Senate election. A lot of people consider this like the election that hinges on the Democrats taking back the Senate. Like if they don't get this, then I guess the hopes are over. I mean, and we saw with a lot with Beto, came that close, and now we've got Tallarico trying it again. Do you think he's got a better chance than Beto, or how are you feeling?
I think that a lot is to kind of be written in front of us, and we're going to have to see what happens over the next few months. But I'll tell you the things that I feel very positive about was the kind of campaign that he was running, and look, what were the best parts of Beto was that if you talk to kind of political analysts, for example, they'll say things like, "Hey, Beto's going to every county strategy maybe wasn't the best use of resources, right?" And maybe that's true on like in a kind of very detached sense. But you know what it did is it gave people the confidence that like this campaign represented Texas and was for Texans. And I think that like yes, maybe it's a gimmick, but the gimmick works. The gimmick is motivating, even if it doesn't win and flip counties that typically go Republican. It allowed people who were going to vote and participate in kind of advocating for the ticket to feel very confident about that. And I think with Tallarico, if you talk to people who are big supporters of his, you'll see that same kind of energy. And I think continuing to kind of like run a campaign that's yes positive, but is also serious about the issues that we're facing, and really gives people something to believe in, you can go a long way because people really in Texas. People really have been looking for something to believe in. I think it's very easy for people to become kind of cynical about politics anywhere, but especially here, you see that in the low voting rates. So having somebody who can make you feel that, hey, engaging in politics is a way that I can actually make my life better, that's a tremendous advantage. And if the Republicans, put up somebody like Paxton, there'll probably be even more advantage, and we'll have to see what ends up happening if, we even end up getting that runoff in the long run.
Sure, sure. Um, I want to talk a little bit about Zoran Mamdani, kind of considered the golden boy of the Democratic Party right now, one of the rising stars. Another common refrain I hear from people is when they talk about repeating Zoran in other parts of the country, you'll have conservatives or more of the conservative Democrats be like, not everywhere is New York. But so I was curious, do you think a Zoran-esque candidate could have a similar rise in Texas?
I would totally agree with anybody who says that Texas is not New York. Where I would maybe push back is, you don't have to be a New Yorker to be worried about affordability. You don't have to be a New Yorker to be worried about healthcare. You don't have to be a New Yorker, to be wanting to have a better life and education for your children. So yes, Texas is not New York, but running on things that matter to everyday people, hell, that's a good strategy anywhere. And I think that like there is certainly a path for somebody who just focused on the things that everyday people need. I mean, For too long and in Texas and everywhere, pundits who make millions of dollars have made a lot of money talking about what everyday people want and need. And when you see campaigns like Zoran's, you see that those folks are pretty out of touch with what everyday folks need. And maybe we need more people who are spending a little bit more time walking the streets and talking to people, because that was one of the things that I think was very exciting about Zoran, in addition to the kind of policies and the way he ran his campaign. The first thing that he did was go out and talk to Trump voters in New York City and say, "Hey, why'd you vote for the Republican Party?" And it wasn't judgmental. He wasn't trying to convince them. He wasn't trying to argue with them. He was literally just trying to listen to them. Somebody else who did that, I think, very successfully as well was Taylor Vermette. They would go and they would knock on doors, and they would sometimes even call the candidate if somebody had a question that they need an answer to. Listen to people, run on things that everyday folks want. I don't know, politics can seem very complicated, but on some levels, it's actually very simple.
Yeah, sure. Um, Tell me a little bit about this is your first book. Tell me a little
Mhm.
bit about like the making of it. Like how long have you been working on this and how'd you, come up with all this info? Did you spend a lot of time in libraries or how'd that come about?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll tell you, there's so many great databases in the state of Texas. Very grateful to them, particularly the ones that are held at the University of North Texas. But this book came about. So I wrote a story about the fence cutters a few years back, which is a major part of the book, for Jackman magazine. And I kind of had come across this story just doing different research, and I saw somebody note this, and I kind of dug into it a little bit. And it was one of those moments where you start digging deeper into history, and then you find how the way that we understand these events kind of gets distorted, or at least kind of framed in a certain direction. So when I'm learning about the fence cutters, I look into it, and the fence cutters are just this massive movement of poor and working class landless cowboys against this massive enclosure of the state. And they get brutally put down by the Texas Rangers. Well, what ends up happening in the narrative in Texas is that the story is about how the Texas Rangers tamed the West, right? When in fact, fence cutting was so prevalent across the state of Texas, you're probably more likely, if you're somebody who's like a six, seven generation Texan, to be related to a fence cutter than to a Texas Ranger. So it was one of those things that once I started doing that research, I knew that there was a story in Texas. And then The Nation and OR Books came out to me and they asked if I wanted to write a book. And they had initially wanted me to write a book about the entire South. And I said, that sounds really cool and interesting, but I think we'll be able to do a whole story just here in the state of Texas. So it was about a 2 year process. There's been a lot of really great resources and books that have come out in recent years. Tom Alter has a really phenomenal book, that kind of outlines a lot of this history. Greg Cantrell has a really great book on the populist movement. Mark Laus wrote a really great book on kind of cowboying in the West. So there's been a lot of people who have been able to do this work, both on a kind of popular and academic side. That like it has been just a tremendous, honor to be able to kind of like work through these things and figure out a way to write this book in a kind of accessible, everyday kind of language, and a story that I think is kind of digestible and easy read. It's a quick read for people who are interested in trying to see a different view of the state of Texas.
Sure. Um, and yeah, this book is available on orbooks.com. Do you know, is it going to be headed to any bookshops?
Yeah, so it'll be on the shelves, I believe, in April. But if you want it now, you can get it now. No need to wait. But it'll be out on all the major platforms and publishers. I'm going to be on tour. I'm going to be in Houston March 19th. I'll be in Dallas on April 1st at the Wild Detectives. I'll be in Brownsville late March. People follow me on social media at David Griscom. You'll be able to find all those events. But I'm going to be crisscrossing the state. I'm really looking forward to kind of being in conversation with people and seeing the response that this book gets.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Um, I think that's everything I had. Was there anything you wanted to kind of get out there for anybody?
No, please, read the book. Come see me on tour, friends.
All right. Well, that's it. So thanks so much for your time, David.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.